I was wondering what kind of modifications you may make when teaching the stack and trying to restore movement options when a patient experiences radicular symptoms during resets. I'm having good success with other treatment approaches for controlling their symptom profile, but I'm struggling to address their true underlying compensations patterns without eliciting radicular symptoms. Thank you, Mark, for a phenomenal question. So if you have someone who has radicular symptoms during resets, usually this coincides with flexion intolerance, because when I flex the spine down, that increases tension through the nervous system. You have increased tension through the nervous system, and you got a nerve that's not so happy. Problems can ensue, and you may elicit symptoms. And with a lot of the work that we do, we are utilizing flexion-based postures to increase movement options. So what the heck is going on there? How do I go about improving this stuff? Do I do a bunch of extension exercises and call it a day? That's not where I would go, but I would go somewhere close to that, actually. I've had a few people recently who have had radicular symptoms when I got them into flexion. And a lot of times what I see with this is if someone has A to P compression or concentric bias, front side and back side, so they have multidirectional range of motion loss, what can happen sometimes is they may not be able to get a full flexion or expansion posteriorly because of the anterior restriction. When I move, I need to be able to create a gradient. So if I flex my elbow, the only way I can flex my elbow maximally is if I can create maximal stretching or expansion on the posterior aspect of the joint. If I'm going to fold forward or I'm going to do a flexion-based activity through my spine, the only way I can do that throughout and distribute the forces evenly is if I can create maximal compression or concentric bias on the front side of my body. If I have a situation where I'm double concentric, I'm concentric on the front, concentric on the back, problems ensue, and that's why you talk to Zach. If that's my situation, I can't create that gradient and movement is going to be compromised. So I have to create a gradient. Many times, the people who I see who deal with this are people who are wide infrasternal angles who have that secondary compensation on the front side. A lot of times I'll address that front side first. That may look like doing things to improve pump handle mechanics and driving nutation of the sacrum, either keeping them between 60 and 100 degrees of hip flexion or driving hip extension in that case, while keeping the stack. If you choose those areas, that's a little bit of a safer position because you're not driving as much expansion in the posterior aspect of the body, and that can improve radicular symptoms. I've had a couple cases very recently where I went that route. They had limited toe touches and symptoms, and we cleaned up those symptoms without doing any expansion posteriorly. And I think the reason why is because that created that movement gradient that we're talking about. Because if you don't have a gradient, movement is only going to happen in a compensatory fashion, and we don't want that. So that would be something I would consider focusing on with that. That's really where I would go with someone who has that. So if you've restored extension, adduction, and internal rotation-based measures in this person who is feeling these issues going into flexion-based postures, I bet it will go significantly better than tackling the flexion, abduction, and external rotation-based positions. I'll link a couple of my favorite moves in the show notes that will go into how to drive anterior expansion. Awesome question, Mark.